Hello and welcome to Linden New Art's series of Meet the Artist sessions. My name is Juliette Hanson. I'm the curator here at Linden. Meet the Artist series introduces our audiences to current exhibiting artists at Linden. And tonight we're talking to Ash Keating. You're joining us live on Facebook and YouTube, and there'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment about the conversation, please use the chat or Q&A sections. Our Events and Community Engagement Coordinator, Linda Studina, will be monitoring the chat, and she'll pass on any questions that you add in there. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands from which we all virtually meet this evening. Tonight, I'm joining you from Linden New Art, which is on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And Ash is joining us from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And while we're meeting virtually this evening, tonight draws upon the ancient history of this land and reflects the millennia of experiences of First Nations people coming together to create, to learn, and to connect. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all First Nations people who are joining us this evening. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ash Keating. Ash works within an expanded contemporary field through painting, performance, sculpture, video, and intervention. He has exhibited extensively in galleries and created many large-scale, site-responsive art projects in Australia and internationally since 2004. Ash has also undertaken numerous large-scale painting commissions in public spaces, including the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, 2013, the Adelaide Festival Centre in 2015, and Sydney's Domain in 2018. His works are held in public and private collections, including the National Gallery of Victoria, the National Gallery of Australia, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Monash University Museum of Art, and Art Bank. Welcome, Ash, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Juliette. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Always. Yeah. We're going to start by having a look at some of the works and projects you've done over the last 5 years. The work that you've made for Linden is quite a departure from the work that you've made previously. So I think it'll be quite interesting to start by looking at that earlier work so people can really appreciate the change and this recent expansion in the form and materials that you've been using. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint now. We can have a look at what you've been up to. Here we are. So this is a piece that you made for the Sugar Mountain Festival. And I think this, no, that's not right. It was for Splendor in the Grass Festival, yes. Wasn't it? Sorry about that. No, I'm wondering, how did this one come about? Were you allocated this bridge to work with, or did you choose that site?
Yes, no, I was allocated it. A few other artists had previously worked or created a mural on that site. It's actually on private land between sort of these, for more of a better word, sort of paddocks as you get off the main highway on the other side of that bridge there, where all the cars and people park to walk into the festival. So that those bollards there are sort of what shields the cars from the people walking from their cars to go into the festival. So it's almost like this celebratory entrance to the music festival.
Yeah, what an exciting way to enter.
Yeah, I think for that particular project, a little bit similar to my Linden works, it was a bit different to what I was working on at the time, which is the extinguisher-based gravity painting. For this particular project, I wanted to kind of elaborate and kind of, I guess, work with the movement of going through that tunnel. And so this sort of notion of following the line, and really it was sort of a giant version of taking a line for a walk when I was making that work with an airless sprayer with a long extension. And I was basically sort of running up and down the length of the tunnel with different consistencies and pressure of paint coming out of the airless sprayer. So it's quite earthy and quite at the base with lots of ochres and Indian reds, and at the top it sort of connects. It's sort of almost meant to connect sort of land to the sunset or the sunrise in a way.
Yeah, it really works like that. Another piece you might take a look at, which again has that real kind of connection to the natural environment that it's within, is this work that you made for the Lawn Sculpture Biennale of 2016. I mean, it's sort of very site specific, and the precision of it is amazing. How did you go about, I guess, planning for this work? How did you make this?
So I guess I just kind of went down a few times to Lawn in the lead up to the performative painting day. I did actually paint this performatively in front of an audience on the opening day of the Biennale. So it was quite, there was a little bit of pressure based around it to get it right. But you can never really get it right anyway, because the different weather conditions day to day change the color. The reality of what the color I'm going to put down is compared to what is actually happening. So on the particular, on days when it's sort of half overcast, not too bright, not too kind of sunny, that was sort of what I was looking at trying to replicate when there's sort of calmer waters. And and then I documented that a few days later on the right day and time, I guess, to kind of make it look like the illusion. But in all, it only looks like an illusion from a certain angle. If you walk 5 meters further or 5 meters back, the horizon line changes. So it is an illusion from a certain perspective.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So here, the next work we're looking at is a work that you did for the Sugar Mountain Festival in 2016. And for me, this work really speaks to the kind of scale that you sometimes achieve with your work. And again, I was wondering how you go about maybe planning for and then executing work of this immense scale. There's a lot of things to consider, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. With this particular project, it sort of took place in the week leading into the festival getting set up. So it wasn't ideal in terms of being able to, how I like to work and how it's sort of easier to work in terms of being able to really cordon off areas and be quite careful with overspray and lots of different dealing with the wind and lots of elements, if you like. So often I'm dealing with a lot of wind and trying not to really, or sort of working on days where the forecast is quite low. I mean, when you're working at that kind of height, where it's sort of 3 or 4 stories high, the overspray after about 10 k's an hour can really get away from you and get out of control. So it's a bit tricky, I guess. And I guess for this particular project, the content, the the vibrancy and the energy was directly related to the fact that it would be shown and experienced by a music festival audience. And so there was a couple of stages. This mural stayed up for a couple of the iterations of the festival, and there were stages in front of the work, and a lot of people really kind of took in the work while they're sort of taking in music and drinking and celebrating, pre-coronavirus.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So do you use, it's made with the kind of fire extinguisher technique. Do you use different sized extinguishers to try and sort of get the pressure that you need to reach those heights? Or I'm just wondering, from a practical perspective, how you create it.
Sure. Well, with this particular wall, I used a scissor lift to get sort of 2/3 of the way up the building. So often with fire extinguishers, I can paint standing on the ground to about an 8-meter height. And so I guess this building's probably close to double that, where the paint is reaching the top. And yeah, so I use a 9-liter watertight fire extinguisher, which has a tire valve or an air valve, and I undo them, use funnels to put different diluted amounts of paint and water into the canister, and then pressurize it with air to be able to, I guess, be in a situation where I can kind of stand quite far away from a wall, or in a scissor lift quite away from the wall, and direct the paint quite with precision, and quite fast and expressive.
And often when you're doing these site-specific works, they sort of have social resonance as well, and you often work on maybe disused buildings and things like that. We're going to have a look at work that you made in Christchurch. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how this project came about and how you came to be working in that city at that time. Yeah.
So this was in 2012, and I went back in 2016 and repainted the exact same wall after it had a bit of graffiti on it over about 3-4 year period. But this is the first iteration of painting that wall, and this was not long after the red zone of the central city of Christchurch sort of opened up after about 18 months. Prior to that, I was in Christchurch in 2010 making a very different non-painting related artwork for the Skate Public Art Biennale. And I was there when the earthquake hit. I was in residence and made a lot of friends and connections there, which led to me working together with the Christchurch Art Gallery and a grassroots initiative called Gap Filler that was set up straight after the earthquake, and they basically came up with ideas to revitalize areas of the city that had been sort of completely obliterated by the earthquake. Yeah.
Wow. And here we're seeing works that you presented at the substation in Newport. Gorgeous works that were presented all along the side of the building there. How did that project come about?
Well, I've had a connection with the substation for quite a while. I won the art prize that they used to have at the space back in 2012, 11 or 12, and had always sort of been interested in the billboard project they had, and was lucky enough to be invited to do that in 2017. What differed with some of the other projects that you've shown and this was that I was able to create more of a nuance and blend both my studio painting practice with my outdoor practice. So these are all quite large 2.5 meter canvases, which I stapled to the walls of the studio and was able to paint in there. And in the studio, like in my studio painting, when it's gravity based, less to do with the works that I've made for Linden, but when I'm painting in the studio, normally I'm using a lot of water to create a lot of illusion of depth and a softness that doesn't come across in a lot of my extinguisher projects on the outside walls.
And what were you thinking in terms of the color of these? It's just so vibrant. Was it the maybe some of the color of that building itself, or how do you go about selecting colors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always connecting, like I'm always thinking about responding to sight, and whether it's, you know, the horizon line of lawn or the earthiness on that bridge, and movement of the line through that bridge. The brick color of the substation is quite iconic, and that is sort of definitely quite grounded in some of the later of the 6 paintings there. But overall, I was thinking also about a change, and the change of light when you're flying across, or sorry, not flying, when you're going across in a train, and you're going past the substation billboards in a train, and often when you're going on that train line, it also, I think it takes you to Geelong as well, and you kind of have these kind of transient and changing light and landscape when you're on the train. So I wanted to connect with that in a way, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. This next one is quite different because we're moving inside. I was wondering what some of the challenges might have been in sort of working in this 3-dimensional way internally. How did you go about planning for this one, and how is it different in the kind of techniques you used to put it on the walls and the ceiling and everywhere?
Yeah. Well, lots of masking. That was a project with March Studio Architecture, who were redoing the entire inside of a hotel, and there was this sort of notion of warmth, and yeah, I guess just thinking back to that work, I mean, it was a lot to do with just creating a lot of masking. The underneath, when you're going sort of horizontal and underneath, you get less of movement of the paint in a way, and it sort of beads and almost drops like stalactites. So it's kind of interesting process, and it's important to kind of make it feel, I guess, all encompassing. But it is tricky when you're connecting the horizontal and the vertical styles.
Yeah.
It is applied all the same way and quite organically and improvised.
Yeah. We're moving back outside again now, and to another project that really speaks to the value that's placed, on your practice in relation to this sort of vibrant public art. This is a project that you did in Sydney in 2018. What was the thinking behind this project?
Well, actually, it's probably a little bit similar to the substation billboards, in that what you see there is probably only 1/3 of a long length of wall that runs alongside a train line. And I really wanted to change the gradient. I wanted to sort of change the gradient and feel of the entire plane, I guess. And so down below, it's quite deep and dense with the dark blues and and up higher, I guess it sort of gets lighter and warmer. But yeah, I guess it was all quite improvised, and a lot of my projects, when I look back at them, I'm not necessarily that happy with their finished state at times. Often with big scale projects like that, I mean, I'm running out of colors and paint quite quickly because the amount of paint that I use is quite significant comparative to someone that might brush paint on. So yeah, I mean, I guess, but that's part of the beauty of my work, is that there's an instant kind of feel to it, and this sort of, I guess, feeling that there were quick decisions made, I guess.
Yeah, it's incredibly dynamic and exciting to look at. Moving sort of into more recent times, this is another very large scale piece. What was the context for this work?
Well, this is a piece that I'm quite proud of, and in a way, like every couple of years, I mean, a lot of the projects that you've shown were sort of commissions and part of, I guess, opportunities or funding-based opportunities, but they had a timeline, and they had a kind of they were tied up with something. Whereas this is, I wanted to do a project like this where I found my own site, and then actually was able to take my practice into a different direction too. I hadn't worked in that minimal way with the primary colors over the top of the black background before, but I wanted to kind of really shake up where my painting practice was at. Obviously, it's still done with fire extinguishers and quite improvised as well, but I wanted to find a site on the edge of the city. It's up north. The eastern side faces the Mary Creek, the start of the Mary Creek up in Hume, and probably that area won't get built out because it's owned by Melbourne Water. So I wanted to find a site that sort of would stay active for a little while, because a lot of my buildings often get demolished or built out, and then on the day, you can see the yellow on top of the black there is quite, it feels quite sort of quite, you can see the spray in the yellow over the top of the black. And as it happened, late in the morning, it was probably a 6:30, 7 a.m. till about a midday project. At about sort of 10:30, 11 a.m. when it came time to do the yellow, the wind had picked up in a really big way. It was probably like a 30k northerly, and I was filming the work, and it was sort of safe enough to keep painting because there was no real collateral damage of anything nearby, and I had top sheets on the ground down the other end of the wall. So I just kept on painting, and the wind just took the yellow across the face of the painting, and it has this kind of feathery feel, which is quite beautiful and quite unexpected. And I'm quite happy with the composition and the feeling of that piece.
Yeah, it's amazing. And an interesting thing about this work as well is that you translated it later to produce smaller scale works that we can see here, presented in your amazing studio space that we'll talk a little bit more about soon. But I wondered what the process was and what the thinking was behind that translation from such a huge scale. And these works themselves are actually still quite large, a lot of them. But what's the thinking in bringing the scale down into these more sort of gallery-based, domestically scaled works?
I had not responded. I had not made a series of work paintings on linen like this, which responded to an outdoor painting, if you like. A lot of my previous gravity system response paintings on linen from the studio were really created in the studio from, I guess, improvised and from my own kind of, without any outside kind of direct connection or influence. But just getting this studio just after making the work out in Craigieburn, I felt like it was really good timing to kind of make a body of work quite fast for that space, and in a way like create moments and windows into the large scale mural. So what you see in a lot of the paintings are only just moments that might be referenced from the larger work.
Yeah, they still capture all of that movement and that dynamic quality and the sort of the softness that's also in there as well. They're just beautiful. I did want to include this last image, Ash, because it's indicative of the kind of studio practice that you have. I don't know if you can tell us more about the process that you have here. I know that those really large, is this linen again or on canvas? Because they're hooked up to something that can move them around the studio wall. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you're working in these images.
Sure. So I guess the paintings in the slide before this were in the same space before building the multi-purpose space, which is this new studio that's now 2 years old is, I guess, built in reference to the way I need to make work. And so it's an angled floor, which you can see there. You can see the drifting of the paint on the wet surface into a catchment area where it's sort of, in my previous studio before this, I would have trouble, because I use a lot of water in my painting, I would have trouble sort of slipping around in the studio. So I wanted an area where the water would just sort of gravitate towards. But these particular images are of a painting which was really a celebration, an inaugural paint in the studio, and I wanted to maximize the scale of the studio for this first painting. So yeah, I kind of came up with this sort of gradient and warm, strong kind of gradient to kind of work over the top of, and it's the first time I'd used fire extinguishers sort of in a studio context, really, or probably almost the first time I'd used them indoors, really. So I guess it was a celebration of being able to do that. I don't always work with fire extinguishers in the studio. I actually paint with an airless sprayer, but at times the immediacy of using them is great, especially for documentation and taking photos. Yeah.
And so this is where you created the works that are currently on show at Linden. And the title of the exhibition is Duality, which it refers to a lot of things, but in part it's because this exhibition was shown in two parts. So we've actually installed it twice with two different series. The first one was called Ariel, and what we have on show now is a series called Fall. And it was conceived during the lockdowns of last year. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about, I guess making work throughout that extraordinary time and during those circumstances, and how that affected your thinking for the show.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, looking at those images that are still on the screen with or that were on the screen with me sort of standing in my studio space, it was, I guess, important for me to kind of, I really wanted to continue working on a large scale in my new studio, and started thinking about sort of how to approach that with the very very old and particular architecture of Linden. And David, who manages a lot of my projects, sort of came up with the idea to have these maybe central column style kind of walls that I'd work on, and that was an early conversation which led to kind of this idea of paintings that could be freestanding and back to back in the middle of the space. And I had worked with freestanding or hanging paintings before in exhibitions with a show I did at the Meat Market in 2017. And so I guess it was just in terms of that was the way to approach, I guess, or installation. But the work itself, that just took on a whole new life as I sort of started making it, started experimenting. Actually about a year ago, in May 2020, I started using perlite, which is on the lighter Ariel works, on a really large scale experiment in the studio space, where I kind of added perlite through a seed sprayer onto wet paint, and just built up a kind of a real interesting texture, a lightweight texture, but something that felt quite foreign, I guess, especially in terms of the way that I've worked. And there was a vibrancy in that, intense vibrancy in that initial work in May last year, but I wanted to, I guess, bring a softness and a contemplative feeling to the palette in the works that I'd bring to Linden, and these Ariel works have that, I guess. They allow you to really immerse yourself in them and stand in front of them. There are high key colors of sort of high fluoro pinks and oranges, but they're really knocked back with a lot of iridescent silvers, and they don't hurt your eyes too much.
Yeah, and the series that we're looking at now is called Ariel. I wondered if you could let us know a bit more about what inspired these works, in that they do sort of have a feel of looking down on a landscape from above. And I know that they have quite a personal resonance for you as well, in terms of family and the meaning of them. To do with your experiences with your grandma as well. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
For sure. So when I was making the work or building the texture up, it was quite cold in the studio, and it was a thick crust almost, with the perlite, the mica flakes, and the polymers. And I actually used a leaf blower to kind of blow a few loose particles off the surface, and as it happened, the strength of the leaf blower just lifted a few massive chunks out of the painting. So it almost like that mistake almost basically just turned the focus of my work, of these works, into a different direction, as opposed to an entire unified textured surface. I started using this leaf blower to kind of blow away chunks of the surface, and as it dried a bit more, it became harder to kind of do that. So I started using a box cutter to cut into the surface, and then a wire brush, and almost was sculpting these surfaces like they were starting to look like giant world maps. And then I it was at that point I started realizing that they were looking quite topographical and like aerial views. And I wanted to abstract that a little bit more, so I kind of built on the surface of those and the layering with the softness and the colors of the peaches, the oranges, the yellows, with the iridescent silver over the top, which was brushed over the top of the top edge of the surface. And yeah, it kind of started to kind of really form into something that almost looked like desert-like or salt lake-like landscapes.
And I don't know, a lot of people might not know this about you, that you actually you can fly a plane, and that you actually have experience of looking down at the world in that way, and that probably came into maybe some of your thinking about the final look of these works as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I learned to fly with my gran a little over 20 years ago, and some of my first ever paintings in high school were on large canvas were oil-based paintings with washes and texture, and I was using oil paint straight out of the tube in a way like Fred Williams was. So I was kind of very excited. My first paintings, when I sort of got quite excited about art and painting in general, were the inspiration for those works came from my experiences in the air.
Yeah, that's such an amazing return to that subject matter in a way.
Yeah.
And then the second series called Fall, which we have on show right now, has a completely different look and feel and form. We're going to take a look at that now. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the materials that you've used and the processes to make these works.
So quite similarly, I kind of built up texture, but I didn't break it down. I kind of built it up quite uniform, and a lot of the texture is a vermiculite material and microflakes built in with thick house paint polymers, and then sort of to a point where it almost looked like a gravel or an asphalt, a road-like surface, and I wasn't sure where to take the work. I was considering sort of my intuition was to go back to the way I normally paint, with applying lots of water and paint and creating a gravity flow, top-down kind of painting. But then I thought about a way that I wanted to challenge myself with working, and that was with glass beads. I'd bought some from an industrial factory, and I bought some after I saw some paintings in 2018 in New York by American artist Mary Corse, who had there was a retrospective of her work at the Whitney, and a lot of her work is quite similarly textured and also quite minimal too, but she uses a lot of reflective glass beads in her work, and that, just seeing that material used in a particular way kind of excited me, and I thought it'd be great to bring that into my own practice at some point. And it just felt like the right time, with the opportunity with Linden to experiment and do that. And the second half of the show being quite contrast to Ariel. I wanted it to feel quite alien, I guess, and quite microcosmic. So this is almost like the micro look at the landscape, and a very different landscape. I see it as this sort of deep, dark rainforest during the change of seasons, I guess. But also a lot of the bright colors also look like lichen and different types of fungi that you see in dense rainforests. It's not uncommon to see bright red fungi, and it's alive and it's wet and it kind of looks a little bit similar. Yeah, I don't know how I got to this point other than just really kind of grabbing all the bags of the beads at one point and just mixing them all up into buckets with the paint and flicking them on, flinging and flicking different thick, real big thick dollops, but also just little thin kind of areas as well. I wanted it to feel in an abstract way like it was falling leaves and this notion of fall, autumn, the change of seasons, which in a way halfway through the exhibition when I changed the paintings over was the change of seasons. So there is that literal connection to the work, but I wanted them first and foremost to feel like paintings and just, I guess, curious paintings.
Yeah, I think, and the things about both of the series as well is that, we're having a good look at them in this way right now, but to really appreciate the texture of them and the power of them, you do have to be in the space with them. And it was fantastic that you could walk all the way around them, that they were sort of had this monumental feel that you could, and 3D feeling to them as well, but that you really did have to be in the space with them to fully get the richness and the textures, and to see the light changing on them as well as you moved around. And I think that was it was a wonderful thing after last year when so many of us couldn't go out and see real art in real life. It was great to sort of have this show that really reminded people of being in the space with the work is really as good as it gets. I know a lot of people have asked how long it took you to make these particular ones. It seems like because they are so thick and textured that there'd be a lot of kind of drying process and time waiting until you put the next kind of layers on. Is that how you built them up? How long did it take to produce these ones?
Yeah, so the main underlayer probably took a number of weeks, and then the surface, the thick beads mixed into the paint on the surface. I'm not sure, probably just a few days, but it just took me a little while to kind of warm up to actually finding what to do with them. But yeah, a good number of weeks beforehand building up the surfaces, and they were quite dark and black, and then I kind of changed the overall feel of them to be more bronze, and I guess there's an iridescent bronze, and I wanted to kind of make it feel more like alive, more like a tree trunk, as opposed to the surface of a road, which is what it was looking like before I added a lot of the bronze.
They're exciting because a lot of the processes you're describing do have this kind of very experimental approach, and that you are kind of finding out what the materials would do as you were using them on the works, and they just have this real kind of freshness and excitement that I can only imagine you were feeling as you were making them, because it was such a new way of working. Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any other maybe what's coming up next. If you have any other processes or techniques that you're maybe thinking of trying next, or what's your thinking at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about where to go with experimenting. I'm actually probably going to revert back to what I feel comfortable with, my way of painting in the studio before these works, just for an exhibition I've got in Sydney in August. And I actually haven't really delved too much into that style of painting, the gravity system response paintings. Really, I sort of put on hold late 2018, because when I painted the Hume wall and then the large canvases in the studio that responded to that, that was getting a little bit away from the way that I was making studio paintings anyway. So kind of want to find my way back to where I was in a way, and then at some point I'll probably experiment even more, I guess, radically, like texturally and material wise, without maybe a deadline, just kind of much more stranger materials and approaches, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I am excited about like being able to kind of go back and forth from different styles and different ways of making.
Well, thank you so much for telling us more about these works. I also cannot wait to see what it is that you'll make next. Yeah, it's been fantastic to have both of the series on display here recently, and people have until Sunday the 16th of May to come and see the real thing here at Linden. Thank you so much, Ash. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you tonight. I'll let people know thank you. This has been the last of our Meet the Artist events for the current round of exhibitions, but we'll be back for more Meet the Artist sessions with Vipu Srivalasa, Natasha Bieniak and Ruth Hofflick. You can go to our website, lindenarts.org, to join the mailing list and find out more about those events and to make bookings. I'd like to once again say thank you so much to Ash Keating for his time tonight and for talking us through all of the things he's been doing over recent years. Thank you to Mathieu Vandeville and Linda Studina, our vitally important hidden helpers, presenting this event tonight. And thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good evening.